Hi.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for joining us. We're honored to have you and Alex Therapeutics here.
We're happy to be
And
here.
we're very interested in knowing about you. Let's start with you. If you could give us a background on who you are and how did you become interested in startups, entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. I think my journey and in connections to startups and building companies started fairly early on. I actually started my first company when I was 15 years. It was then in tutoring and private education for children suffering from dyslexia. I have history with dyslexia myself, and it was super fascinating working with these kids. So I was 15. They were about 12 years old when they started, and yeah, it was a company that I ran for about 7 years while studying myself. And I think a couple of things that I sort of learned to realize during that time is, first of all, how fun it is to sort of build a company and to venture into that sort of unknown and create something yourself. So that created a huge passion. And also, it was super fun to work with these kids because I had both the interface towards helping them with grades and homework and the school stuff. But since they were all suffering from dyslexia, there was also the sort of a psychological element to it, right? They were all, having some degree of some issues with self-confidence. Why don't I read and write as fast and as good as my peers, my classmates? And helping them with that psychological journey as well came very natural, and I became sort of a big brother to them as well. And I could also bridge the gap between them, the kids, their families, who from a sort of business perspective, they were also a customer, right? Because they were the ones actually paying for the service, and school, right? So that sort of, I could bridge those gaps, which also gave me a pretty good value add. I started when I was 15, and just in a few months, I had more requests from families who wanted to put their kids in my young hands than I could manage myself. And also that started with me being able to raise the price pretty significantly. So I had sort of the impact helping them, but also I could make quite a lot of money, which was also great. And I think I charged 3 times as much as my competitors, if you will, or other companies in the same space back in those days. This was quite a few years ago. So that was the first sort of experience with the entrepreneurship. I never, I was so young at the time, I never had the ambition, or I never sort of built it into a sort of proper company with many employees and scaling it across markets, stuff like that. It was essentially me, and when I had too many pupils, I sort of sent them to my friends who could then handle that. But nonetheless, it was the first step into entrepreneurship. And from there, I studied. I'm also very passionate about education and also learning new stuff. So I started studying psychology, and graduated. Took a bachelor's degree in psychology here in Stockholm at Stockholm University, and continued with a master's degree in economics. And the intersection between psychology and economics is super exciting. Essentially, it's a field called behavioral economics that some of you might have heard before, but it's a super fascinating field and something that is close to heart still to this day. So that also impacted me a lot to sort of get into the world of education and academia in general, and understand sort of what is knowledge. I studied quite a lot of philosophy also during those years on top of my studies, and was very fascinated about that, but also realized pretty early on that academia, that world, how you do things, the pace was not my gig. So it was not a tough choice for me not to pursue a PhD or anything like that. It was really clear that by the end of my studying years, I wanted to get back out there to start, building companies again. So I moved to Hong Kong during my studies. I did an exchange semester there. It was super fun. And after I graduated, I moved to New York for a while to work at a marketing agency. And essentially, I worked close with the CEO at that agency, just shadowing him, doing everything that he didn't have time for, and helping him out. And that was also fun to see a larger organization in place from sort of a CEO point of view, and to understand the challenges and the issues that he was facing every day. Following that, I moved back home to Stockholm, beautiful Stockholm, where we're based today, where I'm based today. I worked in the tech startup ecosystem here for other startups. And before founding Alex, I was also actually some time at I worked as a consultant. So I worked as a consultancy called Russell Reynolds Associates. It's a executive search firm. So they hired, they search and headhunt senior leaders for large companies. So if Google wants to find a new CFO, they are one of 3-4 companies in the world that can actually sort of manage that kind of recruitment. And it was super fascinating getting into sort of the boardrooms and the management teams of these huge organizations, trying to understand where is their industry heading, where are they going in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years, and who then could manage that position to lead that company into that future. So that was super fascinating, and also good. It was a lot of management consulting in there, but ultimately, instead of the end product being a PowerPoint presentation, you actually had a person that you hired for that company, which was super fun to have that human element in there. And finally, after some time, I decided, the American corporate culture was not really my thing after all. But it was really fun and fascinating to learn, how do you find great talent? Because as I hope we will talk about later today, finding great talent to your startup, your company, is that is what it's all about, right? So I could take those learnings and understanding on how do you find great talent, and from there I started to get an idea of Alex. And essentially combining my history, with helping, impact and helping these kids with dyslexia, and also my formal education in psychology and business and economics, combining that to this idea of, can we, actually combine psychology, technology, and design in a unique way, where we can bring products to market that can, fundamentally help, change patients' lives, right? Suffering from addiction, from mental health issues, from somatic or chronic diseases. So that was sort of the starting point.
Awesome. What an interesting journey from 15 years old when you're starting your company, and then helping kids at that stage, then going into education and psychology and economics, behavioral economics, as you say it. And good that we didn't lose you to the PhD side or the academia. Otherwise, maybe it would have turned out in a very different way. Because what I see a common thread over here is, you talked about the word fun a lot, and that's very interesting to see in a business conversation, because business conversations are usually very dry, very analytical, very rational focus. So it's good to see some emotional, people, and fun side blended into it. So great to have that word added. And you also talked about people, and I can see when you were discussing all this that it's very important for you to interact with people in whatever you're building, because the key outcome of Russell Reynolds was also a person that goes in and solves a problem. So great journey over there. And you mentioned something very interesting, which was kind of an intersection of 3 areas, like, say, psychology, tech, and design. And if we talk about Alex Therapeutics, like if we start there, what's the big idea around the company, and why did you found it? Co-found it.
Yeah. So I think just the first idea was an inspiration. Actually, was 2 companies. One Swedish company called Shim. Okay. It's a startup that actually got sold to Kry a few years back. There's also another company called Lark. So if for those of you who sort of in the health, tech industry, maybe you've heard about Lark or Shim before. So essentially what they were chatbots, essentially chatbots that, if I take Shim as an example, a chatbot that was supposed to help you focus on what's most important in your life. I think something like that was their tagline. So you interacted with Shim, this chatbot, in an app, and you could talk about, your friends and your family, and discussing what is most important. Shim would just sort of educate you on the latest research on happiness and how you actually, create the best possible life for yourself. And for instance, Shim would ask you who your best friend was, and when was the last time you called your best friends, and you say, yeah, actually it was about a couple of weeks ago, and 2 days later you'll get a notification saying, hi John, why don't you call Axel, your best friend, today? I think he would be super happy to hear from you. And you're like, yeah, I should actually do that. Something I've been wanting to do and meaning to do, but I just haven't had the time to do that. And I called him, and this was early chatbot days. So we're now back in 2017, right? It was sort of the pinnacles of chatbots. Everyone wanted to start chatbots and give them names. And I think, that was, you can see traces of that in the company today. We're named Alex, right? Alex Therapeutics. And the first initial idea was actually to do a chatbot. But that inspiration also, came to a place where I started pitching this to an old friend of mine, a good friend of mine called Oliver Fleetwood, my now co-founder and our current, co-founder and CTO. And Oliver, he is, he's the smartest person I know, today. He's the most intelligent person I know to this day. And I really, really tried hard to get him on board. So when I started the company, he had just started his PhD. So he did a PhD at KTH and Karolinska KI in something called theoretical computational theoretical computational biophysics, essentially. So that is
wow.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely the smarter co-founder, and the one of the pieces I was missing myself, because I am unfortunately a terrible programmer, a lousy programmer. So finding him and getting him on board, getting sort of that technical co-founder, I think was really the first major step for Alex and for this journey. And that a couple of months later, when we actually registered the company in 2018, that's when we also got our first investor on board. And this was just by sheer luck. I'll elaborate a little bit on this, because I know usually, people listening to this want to understand, how do you get your first investors and what happens there? So it was a bit of luck, and also some, of course, some degree of interest from them as well, right, in the business. So I met one of the founders of a fund called Sweet Studio at a random, startup event. So they were just starting up this fund. His name is Robert Lenne, and he together with a guy called Anders Frostenson, they had just started the fund called Sweet Studio, and this was the King founders' private money. So the King founders, the creators of Candy Crush, right? Amazing Swedish entrepreneurs had put their minds together and some money together to start this fund, where they would invest in companies at a super early stage, essentially at the idea stage. And so I met him, and we got to talk, and I pitched him the idea that led to an actual meeting, going to their office. I brought sort of Oliver. Super easy pitching with Oliver. It's just like, look at Oliver, how smart he is. You should definitely take money from, you should definitely give us money to do this, right? And we pitched, several times. At some stage, I just said, okay, guys, we've been talking, we've been dancing now for a while. It's time for you guys to actually make a decision. And I pushed them to say yes. So that was, I think, the second critical element to actually this company existing today, to get the King founders on board super early on. And with the irony of them having built probably one of the most addictive products out there, Candy Crush, the mobile game. Many of you have tried it or at least know what it is. So they could really bring two things to the table. They could both, understand what addiction is and how that works from a product perspective, but also they could give us the expertise on how do you set up a product development process. If you're going to bring, apps to the market that are actually going to help these patients with, these issues, how do you set up a product development process so that you ensure that when you launch that product, it's going to be loved and used by the patients? And that is so incredibly critical. And the last piece in sort of the pillars, I talked about psychology, I talked then about technology. That is Oliver bringing that to the table. And the final bit is the design bit, right? The UI, UX, interactiveness, getting that experience being amazing. And that was the King founders brought that into the mix. So then we had sort of what we needed. We also got, some funds from them, some investment, right? So I could actually get my first salary in over 12 months. I've been living with zero income. I had no other opportunity to get income during that period. It was a very tough time, but usually something that many other, founders and entrepreneurs experience. And I've got the first investment, and then sort of now we can properly get started on this.
Very interesting journey. And I would just like to go into when you were pitching right now, like, for example, there's funding squeeze right now out there. So there's a lot of pressure on startups to pitch, being transparent to the investors, what their plans are, can they hit them? What was it like? So you said that it was a random encounter which led to something like this. And then you kind of structured your pitching during that process. Was it a difficult process coming from a developer or entrepreneur background, yourself and your co-founder? Or was it easy? Like, how was the pitching itself? Was it very formal, informal? How was it? Did you use a lot of pitch decks, iterations, or what?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think, first of all, going into the case with Alex, even though I had sort of started the company before, I had never properly interfaced with investors, right?
Okay.
So the first company I built was just me, some friends. We never raised money for that venture, the education business. So it was the first time for me. It was far from easy. It was absolutely not easy. We did try to sort of look for funding from other sources as well, from other investors. And, as many of us founders experience, we got so many no's. No, thank you. Super great, but not interested. Probably 100 investors who turned us down, right? So it's part of the process. I think usually what ultimately led the King founders to invest is obviously they were interested, but also just being at the right place at the right time. So I met them there. They just started the fund. They were really looking for their first initial investments. We were actually their first investment in that fund. So the King founders, they have the two funds, Sweet Capital that do later stage investments and Sweet Studio that do earlier investment. So this was really just being at the right time, at the right place at the right time.
I think in work, yeah, please go ahead.
No, I think just to your question about what it was like, right? And I think generally my strong recommendation to anyone pitching to any investor is to make it as informal as you possibly can, right? We did come, we had prepared, we had a pitch deck ready, we didn't have anything else, right? And we just sold a vision, right? And that's all you have when you are in these super early stages, when you don't even have a prototype of your product. We essentially only had this pitch deck. We took that pitch deck and we just sold this vision. And I think back then the vision was very much like what the title of this talk is today, to sort of democratize healthcare. There's so many suffering from this, and there aren't just enough psychologists out there. Not even in a rich country like Sweden, you don't have enough psychologists by far to cover this. So what if you could sort of scale that and automate that to bring this sort of help to everyone that would need it, right? And this has changed a little bit actually to this date. We can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, that's what you sell, and just hope that someone is interested and starts to give you a little bit of money.
Great. Let's tap into the topic of healthcare and democratizing that. But before that, I think it was you were almost at a breaking point. You had no salary for 12 months, had already met 100 investors. So one of the things for the startup founders out there is like, how many have you contacted? In terms of if you are raising funding, like what's your breaking point? Where would you say, no, I don't feel like sending the 25th pitch deck to a 25th investor? So I think in many of the recent talks that I've had, the number that have usually come out is around 50, 100, 150. So that's the level of interaction you need to have to make the odds come in your favor in some way. So,
yeah.
So I'm just validating that from a last talk because I think Timiko, Charlotte was here a couple of months ago. She also talked about, I think, between a 90 to 100 or something. Yeah. So there is something, some magic that happens there.
Yeah, it's for sure a numbers game, right? So it's, you just have to, realize that it's not ultimately, especially in the early stages, it's not that much about you or the company. Of course, you can improve, and you do improve a lot, but it's about finding that right person, that angel investor, or usually it's an angel investor, right? Or a fund doing super early pre-seed, finding the right fit. If they get excited about the idea, it takes 100 outreaches to get to that point. I think that's the magic of it.
But you're so right, because you talked about also that keep it as informal as possible so that they can focus on you and your idea and your vision. Because eventually, as an early stage startup, they know that you are too early, so they are going to be investing. They're taking a risk on you as a person.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important for us to realize that if you can make it informal, if you can help them trust you, and you are really taking something very transparent to them, it'll take it.
Yeah.
And also on the point of, so I think you found the magic of the third part of the, how would you say, component of the technology, where you talk about design and where this King's investors came in. We incidentally had Lars Giordano here a few months ago. He was a big part of the Candy Crush saga, and he was talking about like how they reached the Candy Crush success was through 1,000 flash games they kind of reviewed and then reached that site. So it's a numbers game, yeah. But great, John, very interesting so far. Let's talk about the big thing here, democratizing healthcare, and what do you think is the problem out there, and what kind of solutions are needed? Is there a stigma around healthcare? Is there an access problem? What are the big problems in the healthcare space, and then mental health care, of course?
Yeah, sure. So I think it makes sense for me to also talk a little bit about, we started as, having this idea about the chatbot. I can also tell you a little bit about what is Alex today, right? And how are we different? So today we don't do chatbots as we did. We are what's called a software as a medical device manufacturer. So that sounds maybe a bit complicated, but essentially what we do is that we build apps. Ultimately, it's apps, very much like the wellness apps that you download on your phone to get help with anxiety or quitting smoking or drinking or whatever it could be, right? But what we do is that we claim and we want to prove that these products actually work, right? Okay. So what we do is that we run clinical trials on these apps. So they are fully standalone apps. There are no human element into it. It's not like telemedicine where you have a psychologist, talking or someone chatting behind the apps. The apps are completely autonomous, non-human standalone apps, but we still want to treat our patients, right? So we treat patients. We want when they have completed their program, which usually is a cognitive behavioral therapy based treatment. we want to prove that they actually have results from that. Either, they have reduced their anxiety, or they managed to quit smoking, for instance. And so we are in the medical context. And by doing that, the intention of since the intention of these apps are to treat, we are also then classified as software as a medical device. So in a sense, we are, as close to a pacemaker, which is also a medical device, right? Inserted into your body. In a sense, we're as closely related to a pacemaker as we are to, a wellness app that you download on App Store, right? Because we also, as a software, we're only software, but we're still a medical device. We need to make sure that we adhere to all the regulatory, burdens and risks that are set out, all the rules that are set out of developing a medical device. And that is extremely, extremely regulated and tedious. It takes a lot of time and resources, but in the end, we can then ensure that our products are safe and effective. And that is super, super important, I think, especially in the field of health today, where there are so many, apps out there, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of apps out there, claiming that they are actually improving the people's lives, but you don't really actually know, right? They can't prove it. And that's, I think, where we are fundamentally different.
No, very interesting point on the regulatory side. And as with many other areas, like legal is also, so legal tech entrepreneurs are also, because the legalese between the countries and region varies a lot, and health standards and hence regulations vary a lot. Does that put pressure on your expansion? For example, like what kind of is there a central authority in the world where you need to get approval and it's complied by, or is it that you need to kind of do it in every geography that you enter? How does that go?
Yeah, so great question. So the system, how it works today is that in Europe we have a centralized system called the CE mark.
Okay, yeah.
CE mark is then put once we are sort of approved as a medical device, that the CE mark is put in the app. And in the US, Europe and US is our core markets today. In the US, you have FDA, right? So FDA is regulating these medical devices and making sure that they also adhere to the standards of the US markets. So in the rest of the world, if you go sort of east and many of the Asian countries, they say okay to the CE mark. So if you have a CE mark, it's also more or less fine. This varies from market to market, but the CE mark is such a high standard that it is okay in those regions as well. So
it's CE mark and the FDA. So usually when a app you create, it goes through that regulatory. And usually how long is this process of getting compliance, and then actually like from creating something and getting into the market, what's the black hole or the black box?
Yeah. So that's a great question. We are working super, super hard to reduce that time as much as possible. And I think that's one of our key value adds, to investors and to our partners, is that we can actually spend that time. So usually it's about, 6 to 8 months to develop the product for a new indication. So let's say we're going into migraine, for instance. Okay, so 6 to 8 months to build the product. Then we run a clinical trial on that product. That usually takes about 9 months to a year to run that trial. And then depending on, which risk classification we have, there are class 1, 2A, 2B, class 3 in these sort of in the medical device sphere. Depending on that, it could take very quickly. If you're a class 1, you can essentially self-regulate. So if you've done everything correctly from the start, you are more or less CE certified by that point. Otherwise, you have to go through what's called a notified body. So you have an external body that goes through all your technical documentations, the whole processes, make sure that you adhere to all the rules, and then they give you that stamp of approval so that you can CE mark. And that can take also 6 months up to a year in some cases. Currently in our world, the notified bodies are super, super swamped since the pandemic. So they have a huge backlog, and it could take you a year only to get a notified body to review your documentation. So from where we, started when we released our first product for nicotine addiction, it was sort of a wellness category app. It could be the first version could release in, I think we were super quick, like 3 to 4 weeks. We had the first MVP out. And now it'll take us, 2 years plus, two years to get the product to market.
And what's your experience so far? Because you have consciously chosen the space of software as a medical device. Do you intend to be in that space, or do you think that hardware and software integration could also be something for you?
So we really like the software space because of its scalability, right?
Okay.
So that's something that we do. So we will I will never say never, but we will most likely develop our own hardware. Some of our competitors have entered into that world, but if you think software is difficult, hardware is hard. That's what you say about hardware, and it just brings another dimension of complexity into how you develop, how you actually distribute these products. So we are sort of staying away from that currently. But what we do is that we, from a technical standpoint, we can integrate with already existing hardware, right? So I have this right now, and many of you have other similar, wearables or rings, whatever it could be. So we can integrate with that kind of hardware that's already out there. And that I think is really interesting. Okay. But I think what is most interesting, to the final point to that, is the biometrical data that you can collect only using your phone. Okay. Right? So today you can collect activation data, sleep data, etc. So you don't have to have an expensive wearable to actually get that, and then you can really bring things to scale if you only need a smartphone.
Okay, great. I just noted here that there was some issue with the chat because I got a pop-up from Zoom. Zoom made a major update yesterday. So I had a couple of meetings which were going like haywire. So anybody who has not been able to put the chat on, you can now chat. I just enabled that from here. There was something, but anyway, a great discussion so far. I'm also maybe because our audience, they'll be entrepreneurs, innovators, and ecosystem builders over here. What's your business model? I'm very curious about it because healthcare sector varies a lot. So we in Sweden are hugely subsidized and public funded in terms of healthcare, and some of the other healthcare startups or health tech startups have taken that route. But there's also opportunity to make for the money to come from the workplaces, like the corporate sector itself, or from the end patient. Like how exactly? That's the question that has come up on chat. Great product positioning. What's the business model? Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Dolly, for taking the question up.
Excellent question. So I think that's a super fair question to ask. Why do you set yourself up so that it takes you 3 years to launch a product instead of 3 weeks? And there are actually a reason for that. So what we can do by building medical devices instead of wellness apps is that we can connect to reimbursement, right? Okay. So if you think about traditional medication, right? Prescription medication, pills, right? You get a prescription from your doctor for a pill. That drug is then reimbursed by healthcare system, or in some cases by individual payers, like in the US, for instance, insurance companies covering that medicine. And there is an industry, the industry that we're in, it's called digital therapeutics. And that is essentially, the business model is then copied essentially from traditional medication. So our products, medical device, products can be today prescribed by a doctor. So you get an app on a recipe, right? Prescription. And that app is then, the cost for that app is then reimbursed. So the patient is not paying for the product. It's covered by a healthcare system or an insurance company. And this is, I think, a super exciting business model. First of all, because you can price the product much higher than you would if you would, ask money from the end user, right, from the patient. So in our world, I can give you some examples. In Germany, you have national reimbursement for medical devices, health apps that are medical devices. If you get approval, so you need an additional approval from the regulatory authorities in Germany to actually get reimbursement. But if you do, you have national reimbursement. But you can also charge them and price that, up to, between 500, or I mean, it varies a lot, but up to, 500 up to 1,000 euros per 90 days prescription. So that is, significantly higher than what you could get from the patient itself, and the patient pays zero.
Okay.
And actually, just 2 weeks ago, the highest priced medical device in this category was announced, up to 2,000 euros for 90 days prescription for an MS product. This is a fully digital, app. So that is the business model, essentially, to tap into that market and get reimbursement and prescription for the products that we build.
Awesome. Great. We have Robbie's question there. I had another question, like you are then creating a family of these devices. So do you keep it separate, or how do you have the intention of tomorrow being an ecosystem of apps, or do you want these to be independent and not related to each other? How do you because it's a question both of how you do it in business and how you do it as an entrepreneur in your mind.
Yeah, right. No, I think one of so many companies, many of our competitors, they focus on one indication, right? So they say, we're going to deal with insomnia, and we're going to build one insomnia app, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to be an insomnia company, right? And we decided very early on in our journey that we're not going to be a one or a few indication company. So what we said instead, let's invest in a platform, in a fundamental technology that we use to launch many different apps in many different indications. So one indication is one app. So we have for addiction, for anxiety, in the future for obesity, for opioid use disorder, migraine, what it could be, right? But obviously, we want to rely as much as possible on the technology that we already built. So in our case, we can transfer a huge degree of what we already built in our previous apps when we move into in developing a new app, right? A new medical device app. So that's how we have decided to do it. So the platform, and then different apps for different indications.
Great. So the model is like you identify a problem, see how big is the opportunity and how closely your current tech can latch into that and how fast that can go out. So that essentially is the route to market. Very interesting point. We'll turn to the question here from Robbie. Great session. Thanks, Robbie, for enjoying it. I would be interested to know how the team is resourced given the wide range of conditions that they do and wish to treat. Do you bring on different experts or specialists for each condition? And are these consultants full-time staff? How does that go?
Yeah, super great question. And so I think one element that we haven't talked about yet that I think is really important is that we are sort of a development engine. Alex Therapeutics, we focus on building these products, getting them sort of ready for launch, if you will. So in our core team, we have psychologists. Now I'm talking about full-time staff working at Alex, psychologists, product designers, amazing product designers. We have front-end developers, back-end developers, data scientists, and regulatory experts, right? So that is sort of the full value chain that you need to actually bring these products to market. And what we do is that we partner up usually with pharmaceutical companies. So we currently have a partnership with Pfizer, for instance. That's probably a company that most of you know. But it's a partnership where they then do the clinical trial on the product. So they're responsible for the clinical trial, and then they commercialize the product. So they have, obviously they have a little bit more muscle and a little bit more strength in terms of reach to the doctors who will then prescribe, and to the patients. So they make sure that this gets out there in the world. And then we have a commercial agreement between us and this pharma partner, so that we take a part of the revenue and they take a part of the revenue, and sort of everyone wins in the end, right? So that's how we do it. And to the specific question then about staffing, etc., usually our pharma partner, they are the experts in the indication. So if we go into migraine, we have a pharma partner. They usually have some other drugs in the pipeline or already on the market in migraine, have a huge network of experts in the migraine space, and we can leverage that knowledge. But I should also add to that a usual mistake that is being made in our industry is that you rely too much on the experts. You have these, super senior doctors, expert doctors in their fields, super competent people. You have professors who've been researching in this indication for, decades. But the issue is that they think that they know what the patients want. That is usually their problem. So they will tell you they will tell us what the patients want. But when we go and ask the patients, they say a completely different story, right? And that is the fundamental issue in life science in general. You don't listen enough to the patients. So you should definitely involve the experts, but most of all, you should listen and ask and talk and interact with the patients as along the patient or the product development journey. So in our case, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patient deep dive interviews throughout the first early idea concept stage of building a new product to the very end when the product is launched. So that we can ensure that when the product hits the market, gets into the hands of the patients, they have been the one who created it with us and they already love it.
Awesome. I think that is your competitive advantage, which is non-replicable if you compare to big pharma, because there will be, or any other actors who are traditionally focused on the expert and downward flow, while as a startup, you are bottom of the pyramid up. Exactly. So that's unreplicable and very smart working with pharmaceutical sector. I've worked as a consultant in this space with some of the actors several years ago before Sweden. So I think very smart way of putting up the startup. Let's see, we have more questions. So Robbie has a follow-up question. From a business model perspective, are they thinking of offering the platform on a white label basis for incorporation into third-party solutions?
Great questions. I think that's a little bit two separate questions for me. So first question is the white label side. And yes, so we do white label solutions. So we build a product, it's called a DTX in our world, digital therapeutics. So we build a DTX. We also remain what's called a legal manufacturer. So from a regulatory standpoint, someone has to be the legal manufacturer, so the responsible body for this product. So we will remain the legal manufacturer, but we can white label the product. So it sort of looks like and feels like it's our pharma partners' brand. So they can have their brand on it, but we maintain it and make sure that it's sort of bug-free, that it's safe and effective and all of that. Integration with third parties is a little bit of a different topic. And I think what we've tried to do, we of course we can integrate with third-party solutions if we want to, but to this day we don't do that much. We think it's we believe a lot in sort of gathering our own data, for instance, having our own algorithms. We want to build as much as possible everything that we do in our platform, from the design elements to algorithms and AI, we do in-house, because that's where the value is for us and for the company. So we want to retain as much as possible of that value. And therefore, we don't actually integrate and work that much with third-party solutions.
Okay, very good. We have a question from Tara. Very inspiring session. How much support did you receive from the tech ecosystem to grow your business besides the investors? So, yeah.
So that's a great question. And I think that's sort of also one of the key advice I give to founders, just on their way to starting that journey. It's just like, ask for help, right? If you are passionate about what you do, if you want to create something, most people will help you out, right? I have received so much help during my early days, and I still am to a large degree, right? But especially in those early days when there's so much, essentially everything you do for the first time, reach out to, ex-entrepreneurs, expert consultants. I have had so many, pro bono hours with lawyers, experts, people who otherwise charge a lot from their time, just because I was, I had this vision, I had this passion, I wanted to change the world in this very sort of niche way. And I got a lot of help, right? And the tech ecosystem, absolutely, that's just one part of it, but so much more than that. So get out there and ask for help. You will get it. Trust me.
Thank you so much. Just for the audience, we are very happy that John at times joins us at Founder Institute Nordics and mentors entrepreneurs and runs these sessions on how to build your startup. We are very thankful because one of the next questions is like that. So I'll just put it across to you if something we can tell the startup. Hello, I'm Nasreen, studying entrepreneurship, sustainability, social change at Linnaeus University. Thank you. I have studied at that university as well. So hello, Nasreen. We have started planning a startup, Voice for Mental Health, and our focus is international students who do not get enough support while studying in a foreign country. This makes them depressed and leads them to a bad experience regarding study and personal life in an unknown place. We are new in our plan, so maybe you can suggest something to us. How can we develop this idea? So they seem to be very new. What should we do? What should they be doing at this point in time?
Okay, so I think you got the first tip already, right? With asking for help. Reach out to people that you don't know, that you have no connection to. It doesn't matter if you have no connection. I mean, it helps if you do, but even if you don't have any connection to that person, reach out to them, ask them to help you out. If you can pick their brains, if you can bounce ideas or if you have questions, right? Secondly, I think, as a new founder, I think a lot of the ecosystem and the community, and maybe you're a little bit, this might be a little bit your fault as well, Namul, that you usually you push for investments, right? That is the ultimate goal of a startup, right? To get that first investment. That's what everyone needs, right? And I don't actually really agree with that. Okay. I think that investment can be good, investors can be great, but it can also be a huge distraction, right? And it can take super valuable time from you and the founding team. So my concrete suggestion for you in particular, and for any founder, is to, instead of going to investors trying to get funds or funding, go to your first potential customer, right? And to get a little bit more money, always try to find a business-to-business angle. I mean, I'm giving very general advice. This will not apply to all of you, of course, but try if you can see, try to see if you can get, a B2B angle. I mean, in this case, just on top of my mind, obviously, maybe going to the universities themselves, right? Go to the universities, tell them the story. There are many of your exchange students that are actually suffering from mental health issues. We have a solution for them, and we want you to pay for that, right? And ask them to give you money so that you can build your first MVP, the first prototype, and bring them along, right? Because you want your customer, you want the universities to be with you through the development process anyways, right? So they can tell you as well, right? And maybe the universities will be super happy about this, because then they can brag to all their other partner universities that if you bring your exchange students to us, we will take care not only about their education, but also about their mental wellness, right? So that can be a great pitch for these universities. And universities have a lot of money, especially in the US. if you want to go there, they have so much money. So they would have no problem with giving you the additional funding that you need to actually get the product to market. So skip investors, go for a B2, a corporation, a company, ask them for money.
I think that's an amazing point. And I completely agree with this. This actually emerged in our last evening's discussion, because we are seeing this investor kind of crowding out or squeeze on the capital right now. So the general discussion point that was coming out from last evening's discussion as well at the Founder Institute panel was bootstrap, make it customer friendly, have something on the table, and try thinking monetization from day one, rather than thinking that somebody else will come in and put the first chunk of money in it and then you will do something. So I think it's very hands-on, lets you go into action mode very quickly. And for Nasreen, I think something you can do, there's a strong ecosystem in the region where you're building. You can reach out to organizations like Driv Huset. They have an office in Växjö. I don't know if they have in Kalmar, but Driv Huset is there, Companion is there, Almi is there. And if you are in Växjö, there is in the Linnaeus Science Park, there should also be an incubator called Foritax Fabrican. So maybe they can help you, and they have a lot of very interesting initial grants available. So check those out. We move to the last couple of questions. I know we are nearing the close of our program. How are you? This is a question. How are you approaching the adoption usage issues? We know that patients can drop quickly, and digital health is still behind the real value demonstration and expectations set by various actors, authorities, and clinicians. Today, there is no large-scale deployed solution and consensus about the success.
Yeah. So this is a huge topic that I will try to cover now in 60 seconds. And I think, generally, this is still a big issue for the industry, but honestly, this is a big issue for any industry, any app, except, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, to have a great adoption, a great retention on your product. It's very, very often that you see companies failing in this regard. And I mean, I can just tie back to what I said before, that, make sure that you don't think that you know what your end users want when you develop the product. That is the core issue. And that, I think, again, going back to the life science example, there's so many examples of doctors, professors, experts who have built something they think that the patients and the end users wants and need, and that will not end up in a good way, right? So make sure to involve the end users in the product development as early as possible and as often as possible. And hopefully then you get an impressive, adoption and retention of the products. Because ultimately, fundamentally, what we have realized at Alex Therapeutics that our competitors haven't is that we're not competing with other digital health solutions. We're competing with TikTok, we're competing with Instagram, right? And that is fundamentally what makes us different.
Okay, got it. A couple of very, very quick questions. I don't know, can we run over by a couple of minutes, John?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Okay. I'm curious about the final adoption. How difficult is it to get your solution to the end user patient when it needs to fight with other treatments like traditional therapy, medication, or other DTX products?
Yeah. So it's incredibly tough, right? The industry that we're in, DTX, is still a fairly new industry. Some companies have been at it for many years, but that's a very, very few companies. I think just in the past, honestly, 2-3 years, this has become a more established industry. And you have many issues, launching a DTX, because first you have to, convince the doctors, right? So you have to convince the doctors that this is a superior solution, that it's better than the other solutions. You need to explain that it's not only effective, but that it's also safe for the patient to use, right? They care a lot about that. You have to educate the doctors who don't have any time whatsoever in trying to understand your solution and how it's different. You have to educate them and sell it to them so that they can also then recommend and prescribe this to the patients. So then you have to convince the patients that this is a good thing to do, right? Why should I use this silly app, right? I don't care about that. I just want the pills or the in other interventions that are out there.
Got it.
Convince them and understand that this is an important part. And then you have to convince the payers, the ones who in the end pay for this, right? So you have so many different stakeholders that all needs quite a lot of convincing, making it incredibly challenging. The way we have decided to solve this problem is working with pharma companies, right? Because they already are doing this with traditional drugs, convincing payers, convincing doctors, convincing patients. So that's why we are leveraging their expertise and network in this. What they haven't done, though, is sold digital things, right? That still remains to be seen, honestly, if the pharma companies can actually, sell digital medicines at the same scale as they can sell pills.
Yeah, and that might already be so. When we are talking about an established infrastructure, there are many costs or priorities associated with a current infrastructure itself, which make it very difficult for large companies to change direction in a big way. So that might be a scale issue with the existing industry. We take one or two last questions now. Please tell us a bit more about deep dive interviews with patients. Do you have any stories or anecdotes about a time when a focus group participant's insight dramatically changed strategy for developing a product? Also, do you work closely with universities on engagement strategies?
Yeah. So essentially what we do is that when we start a new product, when we develop a new product, we instantly try to reach out to patients, patient advocacy groups, patient organizations, Facebook groups, sometimes directly ourselves or sometimes through our pharma partners. And what we then do is that, our product designers, they are, not through Alex, but before joining Alex, they are highly educated in how you run, UI, UX interviews, how you actually test products together with the end users. So what they do essentially is that, our psychologists and our product designers, they sit down, have, 1 or 2 hour interviews with patients, asking them about their issues, trying to understand, we have these assumptions, are they correct, or is it something else, some other issues that you are suffering from, and in many cases, you'd be surprised, right? So, you ask a cancer patient, what is your biggest issue, right? And the issue is not that they're in some cases that they will, die in a few years, much earlier than than they were expected to do. But the issue is that they're not living their life to the fully, in that short time. They're having anxiety, they're having depressions episode. So they don't necessarily feel that they want to live longer. Of course, if they could, they would, but that how do you improve that life, the quality of life for them as much as possible during the time? So really trying to understand the fundamental issue that you're solving for this patient. This is the sort of the early stages of the product development that is steering everything. Everything that we do is, or not everything, but most things that we do is actually determined by the input that we get from the patients. Of course, there are elements of, conversing with experts, and also most fundamentally probably literature. So our psychologists, our medical staff will obviously look at the literature, what is being done before, what has worked before, but how we tailor those interventions in the actual product is then determined by the patients. And then continuously on a weekly basis, we invite different old patients that have tested earlier versions of the product and new patients to look at the screen of the early frameworks, have them try it out, seeing how they feel to understand what the next step is, how they should use the product, and telling us why that is.
Awesome. John, we have reached the end of the program, and we really appreciate your energy and your passion for what you're building, and appreciate your openness on some of the very interesting points where you raise that you need to focus on building your startup rather than chasing the investor with all your time, because of course time is the limited resource when you're building something. Maybe you're doing a part-time job and building a startup, and also being very transparent and very open about how you are building your own business. So a big thank you to you for being a part of our talk today and sharing all these insights. A big thanks to all the audience and all our community members who are here. I've put these links to John's and my LinkedIn, and I've also put links to a couple of upcoming events, which is the Pitch Your Startup to Nordic Experts and Investors. You can copy it from chat here. John, thank you for today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great